If you can take your mind back to that scary, uncertain time when Biden was still the Democratic nominee, there was a lot of language from conservative America that was basically harping on about how he was too old, he was too incompetent, or that maybe in the most extreme cases, he was not going to survive another term if he got elected. And what fascinates me about that time is that when Democrats finally smelled the roses, got up and realized that he had to go and convinced him to, conservative America kind of started panicking. When conservative America won that fight, and it became clear to everyone, including the Democrats, that Biden was too old to continue running for office and he stepped down, it was almost like, instead of celebrating that victory, higher-ups in the Republican Party, including Trump himself, almost went into denial. The most extreme language that we have seen on this issue of Biden being replaced from Trump and surrogates of his within the Republican Party is that this was effectively a coup by the Democratic Party to overthrow their nominee. And the consistent use of that terminology, I think, is pretty interesting. And I think it points to a couple things. Like, first of all, I think there's a good electoral, campaign reason that Republicans are using that kind of messaging. And then I think there's a second reason why they're turning that way, which kind of tells you a lot about what the MAGA movement and Trump himself believe about holding power. To answer the most direct question of this video, no, it was not a coup. Biden, of course, there was pressure put upon him by other politicians, but Biden eventually made the decision to step down. I think that if you imply that resigning in any way because of external pressure is a coup, then extending that logic, was Richard Nixon couped when he faced immense political pressure and had to step down? There's a difference between stepping away from power because there's pressure and actually being forced to. Biden, by the rules of the DNC, can pretty much tell his delegates, the ones that he wants, to do whatever he chooses. They're bound to him and his decision-making, and he made the decision to endorse Harris. But the Republican Party does have a point in that Harris herself was not directly elected. Of course, she was the second to Biden, and if he had died in office at any point, she would have taken over. But it is fair to say that in the Democratic nomination, she was not a candidate that actually won by herself. The Republican Party has a perceived issue amongst the electorate, or some portions of the electorate, of being undemocratic. Be it any of Trump's statements or his actions on January 6th, there is somewhat of a concern amongst the American electorate that the party doesn't respect democratic traditions. And a good way to counter that is to point out that your opponents have subverted in some way or attacked traditional democracy in a different manner. It's like trying to force some sort of false equivalency of, if you want to attack us for breaking democratic tradition, look at what they've done on the other side. Now, look, that by itself probably isn't going to change too many minds, but it does help to have that answer of Harris was selected without a democratic process when people push you on issues of being undemocratic. Now, look, like I said, it's not going to change too many minds, but it is a good soundbite to have in response to such questions. That's why I think at some level it's good strategy to campaign like that. But the more interesting thing about this is what it tells us about Trump conservatives and the MAGA movement. There have been internal leaks since Biden has dropped out. And even J.D. Vance, I think, admitted on camera that there was a bit of a slap in the face. They were really caught off guard when Biden did drop out because they were really riding on a high. Trump was well ahead in the polls by Republican standards and looked like he was heading for a landslide victory well into the RNC, picking J.D. Vance, and then abruptly the entire dynamic of the race changed, seemingly overnight, when Harris replaced Biden. And I think a big part of the reason that they were caught so off guard is that they assumed that Democrats were as dedicated to their leader as Republicans are themselves. Can anyone honestly imagine a situation where a bunch of higher-ups come to Trump, looking at polling or some disastrous event on the campaign trail, and say to him, look, we think you should step down for the good of the party? That would never happen. Even if a group of higher-up Republicans found the confidence to do that somehow, there is no way that Trump would go along with it. He would sooner sink the party and have it lose with him than have it win with anybody else. Some Republicans genuinely use the language of coup because they can't wrap their heads around the idea of a leader being presented with information that shows that he's losing and then saying, I understand, I'll step away. It is easier for people in the MAGA movement to think that there was some coup, some illegal behind the scenes action that forced Joe Biden to step down than it is for them to believe that Joe Biden saw what the reality of the situation was, accepted it, and took a step back. Because their leader could never do that. And one final thing I think extreme language like coup or treachery or betrayal kind of shows you is that there's somewhat of a sense of denial amongst the GOP, because the GOP can win this race. Trump can win this race. This is a close election, probably the closest in well over 20 years. That was not the case 3 months ago. 3 months ago, the GOP had its best electoral asset, and that was Joe Biden. Against Joe Biden, Donald Trump really had a cakewalk on his hands. There were forecasters that had him as high as an 80% chance of winning the election, but that fell apart pretty quickly after Biden withdrew from the race. In an election that was supposed to be a coronation for Trump, in which he would pretty much waltz his way to a 300-plus electoral landslide by modern standards, has now become a true knife fight, where he can still win, but he's not going to win in the way that he would have wanted to. So yeah, there is some electoral reasoning for using language like Kamala's coup or the betrayal of Biden. But I think a bigger reason why language like that is used is because conservatives can't wrap their head around the idea of a leader stepping aside for the benefit of his party. And there also has to be a sense of like political loss. The best person you could have run against, Joe Biden, is gone. So when you hear terminology along those lines, Kamala's coup, the betrayal of Biden, maybe conservatives just miss Joe.